Hello, Mediocre Stories here. Today we are going to have part 2 of The Peasant and His Daughter. If you haven't checked out part 1, please do. The link will be in the description. But if you have, sit back and enjoy the story. Boren and Ella, who had just woken up from the sounds of 100 people trying to smash the front door open, looked out the window to see the blood-covered mob. Running down to try to barricade the front door, the panicked couple were met by Ralph, who had also come down with the same thing in mind. Before they could try to help, a large part of the old, rotting door broke off, and Ralph ordered them to run, get to the river, and get out of here. While running toward the river entrance, Boren and Ella could hear Ralph begging, "Boren, take care of my daughter. Promise me you." And then they just heard the terrifying scream of hundreds of people tearing down a door and the skin of a loved one with the same mattering ferocity. When they got to the river, they soon realized that they needed oars, which were in the small castle. Ordering Ella to stay by the boat and promising to be back soon, the prince left the weeping Ella to return to the castle. Fortunately for Boren, the mob seemed preoccupied with scourging for the kitchen for food, so Boren was able to get to the oars without much trouble. But at the oars, a familiar voice called for the dead prince. "James, funny to see you here." James, who could never forget that voice from the battlefield, the voice that had personally seen to the execution of many of James' dearest friends, turned towards his former enemy as a silver sabre was thrust through his gut. The smiling villain grabbed the oak oars that Boren had been clutching on to with his cool hands and slammed James in the back of the head with them. Whistling, William wiped the blood off his blade and proceeded to the river with a large, evil, menacing grin. Boren, who had crawled to a nearby window, died watching the boat row away with tears and blood streaming down his face. It took slightly less than a day for Ella and William to get to Windleham Castle. Ella, who had almost constantly asked the doctor where her lover was assured that Boren had to do something at the castle, and that he would meet her at Windleham Castle soon. Once they arrived, King Windleham was more than happy to receive his son, who he had not seen for a couple of months. A grand and lavish party commenced, but the distraught Ella refused all of the festivities and was shown to a room by one of the many servants. William, who was also not in the mood for partying, requested an immediate consultation with the king. The previous winter had changed and corrupted the boy, William, into the man he now was. The king, who was not sure on the purpose of the meeting, gladly went to the meeting with his eldest son. The king arrived at his throne room, which overlooked the festivities below, to find William sitting on his throne and wearing his crown. "Ah, trying out the chair. Don't worry, son. Your day will come soon. You used to do this all the time when you were younger, as did I in my youth." William, without even looking at his father, spat back. "Is that what you think of me, a boy on a throne, playing king?" The king, slightly agitated, but still trying to defend himself, but stunned by his son's sudden disrespect. You know I didn't. You are just testing. You are just twisting my words." William, playing with his father, didn't respond, instead spitting on him. The king, who couldn't hold back his anger anymore, yelled, "How dare you? I am the king. You are just a boy. Now get the hell off my throne. I'm the one in charge, you arrogant fool." William, listening to his father, stepped off the throne and stood next to his steaming father, pulled out his sword, and cut his father's head off with one fell swoop. William then proceeded to walk to the balcony and demanded the attention of the gay party-goers. "Silence! The next man, woman, or child who utters a word will die." The confused celebrators looked up towards the demanding voice, expecting a jest, but then screamed in fear at the horrific sight. William had pulled out his father's head for all to see, smiling from the chaos that it brought. But the joy was short-lived. William had new responsibilities now. "The king is dead! Long live the king!" the boy king belted at the top of his lungs. The terrified revelers below, now pulling themselves together, kneeled in front of William and the group of knights that soon began to encircle them. They then chanted back, "Long live the king! Long live the king! The king is dead. Long live the king." Ella had heard the commotion, but she continued prancing around her room, wondering where Boren could possibly be. Suddenly the doctor, wearing a crown, entered the room with tears streaming down his eyes. He explained how, in addition to his medical knowledge, he had been the prince of the nation, which they were now in. William, as he revealed to be his name, then explained how Boren, who had been a dear family friend in his unknown past, had been slaughtered by the murderers at Harperstone, and that the Walter homestead had been leveled. William's own father, distraught by the news, had simply died of a broken heart. As a last wish, Boren had requested that William, now King William Windleham, would take care of the woman he loved so dearly. The second marriage, which took place on a stormy night, much like the night Ella had first seen Boren, was filled with tears. At the altar, William was crying tears of joy for his plan actually succeeding, while Ella was crying tears for despair. Ella hated nearly everything about William. He was unattractive and beginning to show a cruel side. The only reason she agreed was to honor her love's final wish. Why had her darling kept his previous friendship with the doctor unknown to her? It was possible that her angel didn't know about him, for, as Ella could recall, they were never in the same room at the same time. But why had the doctor known about him? And why was William at the castle during the attack? Every day William was beginning to show his true face more and more. Although he initially seemed compassionate, lately he had been ordering Ella around like she was one of his countless servants. Yesterday, when Ella had spilled his evening soup on his lap, he hit her with enough power that she had been knocked out. Although, once they were both in bed for the night, he apologized, claiming that he had been caught up in the moment, and that he had just been trapped in a fit of rage. Ella still distrusted him. The next morning, when Ella went to breakfast, William appeared with two girls around each of his arms, claiming them to be his strategists. After a few years, Ella had become a shell of her former self. Her once alluring body was now infected with signs of abuse. The spark of romance, which had once burnt bright in her heart, was snuffed with every coming winter. This morning had marked the anniversary of the attack on the Walter Manor. In prior years, William had come with Ella to the ruins for a day of mourning, but this year he had been too preoccupied with his increasing number of strategists. Still, as long as her heart was still beating, Ella would come to her once merry home. As Ella rode down the streets in a beautiful covered wagon, she glanced at the people she had once called their friends. Most of the people of Harperstone had either been hanged for their crimes or had killed themselves in guilt. Those that were left hung their heads down low, knowing full well who was in the wagon rattling down the street. Ella had remembered the tale of one grieving mother, who, after realizing that she helped murder her own son, locked herself in a room with no water and no food. By the time anyone was able to get into the locked room, she was dead, with her arms clamped together tightly, praying for her forgiveness. Once the carriage had pulled up to the manor, Ella pulled her heavy heart out of the carriage and cried. She cried as the shell of her former self, in the shell of the town she loved, in the shell of her former happy life. Over the last 6 years, William had become a drunken mess. The splinter groups of King Richard's old army had begun to regroup after they had heard the news of their murdered general from the hands of a mob of Windlehams. With the King of Windleham being such a despised ruler, the new army was gaining new members by the day, as William's army was shrinking. According to most of his advisors, William had lost whatever semblance of sanity he once had. His people were constantly suffering while he was throwing large, lavish parties. At these large parties, the once prestigious nobles would endure their king's rambling on about his accomplishments as a ruler. Anyone associated with the royalty was hated by everyone from both sides. When the new Richard army arrived at Windleham Castle, hardly anyone showed any form of opposition, going so far that the bridge past the moat had been let down by William's most loyal guards. As the army tore its way through the center of the castle, most people joined the ensuing chaos. William had locked all doors to the throne room, with only a hidden exit for a possible escape. As his kingdom fell down around him, only Ella was there to comfort him. "Get back, you flirt! This is all your fault. I had it all until you came into my life. You miserable fool. I did everything right. I played you all. I killed my enemy. I destroyed the Richards, all of them. Now I will kill you too." The Mad King pulled out a knife, ready to end his suffering there. Ella jumped back and tried to calm her husband down. "Stop. What would your dear friend Bourne say about this? Would you really do him such dishonor?" William, perplexed and angered, answered, "Bourne, Bourne, Bourne, Bourne. All you say is Bourne. Bourne would have. For Bourne, let's all grieve Bourne. I killed James years ago. Now I just have to kill his better half." Instantly, everything came together. Bourne's, or Prince James' past, his murder, and his enemy. With the swiftness of a raven, Ella's heart burst aflame with the embers of romance, revitalizing her spirits. Ella grabbed William's knife and plunged it through his gut, leaving him to be killed by the oncoming army who were currently breaking down the door. Jumping down into the secret exit, Ella followed the light until she could, as far as she could, to the entrance radiating before her. As soon as she had left the hidden tunnel, she was seized by 5 soldiers from her husband, Bourne's old army. On hanging day, the winds stilled as an angel was brought onto the gallows. This complex goddess, who had been bruised and cut from the crowd and previously from her false husband, showed no emotion. There were gashes on her back from her daily abuse, cuts on her hands from William's ring, aching emerging from her empty stomach that had not been fed for days, and finally bruises on her face from her false husband's fist. Despite this, she was still the most beautiful thing anyone in the audience had ever seen or imagined. In the group of onlookers, filled with hate, Ella had seen some of her old neighbors, and beyond them, beyond the entire mob of spectators, Ella could see Bourne and Ralph beckoning for her. With salty tears crawling down Ella's scarred face, caked with blood and tears, Ella was hung. The executioner turned the other way, not able to see such a gorgeous woman killed, and when Ella stood still, the entirety of those watching fell to their knees and cried. Hey, I'm the YouTube guy. You probably don't recognize me. I'm also in Mediocre Stories. I'm in the short section. If you haven't seen me, come on and check me out.